Welcome to Zoe Crossdressing. Marie Taglioni's footsteps echoed against the kitchen tiles as anxiety propelled her in restless circles. As ballet mistress and artistic director of her city's modest but beloved ballet company, she'd held the position for barely 12 months, hardly enough time to prove herself. Now, with opening night looming and half her troupe scattered across state lines, her worst fear had materialized. The company had been crisscrossing the nation for weeks, a grueling tour that should have concluded days ago. But Marie had made a fateful decision. She'd allowed the board to convince her to split her dancers. Half continued performing farewell shows 3 states away while the other half rushed home to rehearse for the season premiere. The hometown crowd expected perfection, and until that dawn phone call, Marie had believed she could deliver it. At 5:47 a.m., her phone had shattered the pre-dawn silence. A corps de ballet dancer, voice trembling, words tumbling out in guilty confession, admitted she'd violated curfew and wrecked her car in the early morning hours. Marie's anger flared hot and immediate. Not just at the recklessness, but at her own miscalculation. She'd trimmed the roster too thin, gambling there would be no emergencies, no injuries, no disasters. The math was brutal and unforgiving. Her touring dancers wouldn't return until the second performance. Flying someone back early was financially impossible. The company's coffers were already stretched to transparency. Hiring a substitute? The budget had no room for such luxuries. Marie had assured the nervous board members that dividing the company posed no risk whatsoever. She'd been catastrophically wrong. One solution kept surfacing in her mind, unwelcome and humiliating. She could fill the gap herself. Marie grimaced at the prospect. At 55, her face would betray her instantly under the stage lights, a conspicuous imposter among the corps' youthful dancers. Worse still, she questioned whether her body could endure the demands. Decades earlier, Marie had graced the stages of the New York City Ballet, rising through the ranks to become a principal dancer. Her trajectory had been meteoric until a car accident at 35 shattered her ankle, and with it, her ability to sustain the punishing physical requirements of professional ballet. The injury had ended everything. When dance was no longer possible, Marie and her husband, himself a former New York City ballet dancer, finally embraced the family life they'd postponed. Their mutual devotion to ballet had first drawn them together, but he'd always insisted that fatherhood mattered more to him than fouettes and grand jetés. With Marie's performing days behind her, there was nothing left to wait for. Bolstered by her husband's promises, Marie welcomed their daughter Emma into the world, followed 2 years later by their son Philip. For 6 years, Marie rebuilt her identity in New York City, channeling her expertise into teaching eager students at neighborhood ballet studios. Then her husband vanished, not gradually, but abruptly, abandoning Marie and their children without explanation. Months passed in silence. Heartbroken and unmoored, Marie fled the city that held too many memories. She returned to her birthplace, accepting a dual role as choreographer and ballet mistress with the local company. When her predecessor died unexpectedly, Marie inherited the top position, a promotion that felt more like a burden than a triumph. In this moment of crisis, she caught herself yearning for her earlier days as choreographer, when the weight of ultimate responsibility belonged to someone else. But nostalgia was a luxury she couldn't afford. Could the performance survive with one fewer dancer? She ran through the choreography mentally, already knowing the answer. The corps de ballet formations demanded precision, even numbers, perfect symmetry, visual balance. An asymmetrical lineup would assault her artistic sensibilities. She'd watched productions cut corners with incomplete corps before, and the imbalance always gnawed at her. Marie braced herself against the kitchen table as footsteps descended the staircase. Philip, 17 and radiating misery, shuffled into view. For 2 solid weeks, that same defeated expression had been plastered across his face. His girlfriend had ended things, and last night Philip had attempted one final reconciliation. She'd rejected him again, sending him spiraling deeper into teenage heartbreak. Philip yanked a bowl from the cabinet with unnecessary force, muttering bitterly about the failed encounter. Marie watched him slam the dish onto the counter, his jaw set with stubborn determination. He was already plotting his next attempt to win her back, no matter the cost. A smile flickered across Marie's lips. An idea, unconventional, perhaps audacious, began taking shape. From the moment Philip could toddle on unsteady legs, Marie had trained both her children in ballet, just as she'd done with Emma. It wasn't mere parental hobby, it was calculated ambition. Marie had envisioned her children ascending to the pinnacle she'd never quite reached. With two professional dancers as parents, surely genetic advantage and early training would guarantee extraordinary talent. Emma was meant to become the prima ballerina Marie never achieved. Marie had been accomplished, a principal dancer, respected and skilled, but never transcendent. She'd never joined that rarefied tier occupied by legends like Natalia Makarova. Emma would correct that family legacy, or so Marie had dreamed. But Marie knew now that dream was dead. Emma possessed genuine talent and attacked her training with relentless discipline, but by her 15th birthday, Marie confronted an uncomfortable truth: her daughter would never achieve prima ballerina status. Emma was skilled enough, thanks partly to her father's connections. She'd secured a position in a London company's corps de ballet, but Marie couldn't envision her progressing beyond that. Soloist seemed unlikely. Principal dancer felt like fantasy. Philip represented Marie's second grand ambition. She'd imagined molding him into the next Baryshnikov, and initially, the dream seemed attainable. From his earliest years, Philip demonstrated sharper instincts and more natural grace than Emma ever had. Marie could picture him commanding center stage at the world's most prestigious companies. That vision, too, crumbled to dust. The torment began in elementary school, relentless mockery from classmates who viewed his dancing as aberrant. The harassment intensified when Marie introduced him to point work. While primarily associated with ballerinas, certain male roles required the technique, and Marie insisted on comprehensive training. But Philip experienced it as pure humiliation, surrounded by girls in the studio, his technique exposed. When a female classmate, someone from his school, discovered he trained en point, she broadcast the information like breaking news. "Philip dances on his toes like a ballerina," she'd announced, and suddenly his previous bullying seemed merciful by comparison. Philip became a pariah overnight. Whispers followed him through hallways. Accusations of homosexuality, entirely baseless, as Philip had never felt attraction to males, became accepted fact among his peers. At 15, he'd absorbed all the punishment he could endure. He announced he was quitting ballet. The declaration stunned Marie. She pleaded with him to reconsider, argued, reasoned, bargained. Philip remained unmoved. "I'm finished with it," he'd said flatly. "It's destroying me." Marie spiraled for days afterward, mourning not Philip's decision but her own shattered expectations. Neither child would fulfill the destiny she'd scripted for them. Time and reflection eventually brought clarity: she'd been monstrously selfish. Her children weren't vessels for her unfulfilled ambitions, they were separate people with their own paths to forge, their own purposes to discover. She was merely fortunate enough to witness their journeys, however different from her plans. Abandoning ballet was Philip's first act of self-preservation and reinvention. Philip launched a campaign to demolish his reputation. He pursued girl after girl with desperate determination until finally, one, equally desperate for attention, agreed to accompany him to a school dance. That night, Philip seized the opportunity to prove his heterosexuality in the most direct way possible. Fortune smiled on him. The girl was both chatty and sexually liberated. Within days, she'd enthusiastically informed half the school that Philip was definitively, emphatically not gay. Simultaneously, Philip attacked another front: his physique. His slender, 5 feet 9 inches dancer's frame embarrassed him, too graceful, too refined, too balletic. He wanted bulk and mass, masculinity written in muscle. But his compulsive pursuit of romantic conquests, each new girlfriend another brick in his heterosexual fortress, devoured the hours he needed for serious training. His body remained stubbornly lean. Marie studied her son as he reached for a spoon, measuring him with a choreographer's calculating eye. He'll do perfectly, she thought. Philip, sweetheart, I need to ask you something, Marie said, her tone deceptively casual. Philip exhaled wearily. What is it? I need you to perform tonight. One of the core dancers, she's filling in as a ballerina in our opening show. Philip's head snapped toward her. Wait, what did you just say? Tonight's performance. Opening night. One of my dancers was in a car accident. She's injured, and I have no replacement. Marie spoke quickly, preempting his objections. It's Peter Wright's Swan Lake. Core work only, she wasn't cast in any featured sections. Just ensemble choreography I taught you years ago when you were helping me coach Emma. You remember those sequences, don't you? You never forgot a single combination, even after years. She leaned forward slightly. Honestly, Philip, this role is below your skill level, even accounting for rust. Philip's silence confirmed what Marie suspected, his passion hadn't died. She knew, mothers always knew, that he still practiced in private, movements flowing through him like muscle memory refusing erasure. Those very combinations she mentioned, and dozens more. Yet he shook his head, mute with internal conflict. The desire warred visibly with shame. I can't, he finally said. Mom, I'd look like people would think I'm. He stopped, recalibrating. It's too much. You can't seriously expect me to do this. You know what it would mean. I'm not angry with you, Marie replied quietly. Good, because I'm just disappointed. The words struck like a blade between his ribs. Still, Philip knew the stakes. Being seen costumed as a ballerina, even anonymous in the core, even just for one night, it would resurrect everything he'd buried. The mockery, the whispers, the accusations. He'd spent a full year scrubbing away the stain of those rumors. The very word dancer had haunted him like a curse for most of his adolescence. Ballet is a ballerina? Background or not, it was unthinkable. I'm sorry, Mom, Philip said, his voice hollow. I really am. I can't help you, Mom. Philip pivoted toward the cabinet, reaching for the cereal box with deliberate finality. Of course, Marie said, her voice sharp as crystal. Turn away. Walk off. Just like your father did. Philip's hand froze mid-reach. I've sacrificed everything for you, Marie continued. But your pride matters more than that, doesn't it? The comparison detonated something inside Philip. He despised his father with an intensity that hadn't diminished over the years. Every attempt at reconciliation, awkward phone calls, half-hearted invitations, Philip rejected immediately. The wound was too deep. His father had abandoned his mother for another woman, a dancer 10 years Marie's junior. Philip had met her once. She was, objectively, beautiful. That made it worse somehow. His mother's devastation had been total. 6 years after Marie stopped touring, after she'd committed herself to family and domestic life, Philip's father had fallen for someone else, someone still performing, still vital in the world he couldn't leave behind. The betrayal was surgical in its cruelty. Post-divorce, his father barely materialized. A handful of visits annually, squeezed between tour dates and performances. Philip didn't mind the absence, preferred it, actually, but he watched it destroy Emma. He'd held his sister countless times while she sobbed over their father's indifference, her grief a living thing that wouldn't die. Even after Emma eventually forgave him following his retirement, Philip remained unmoved. Reconciliation was Emma's choice, it would never be his. I am nothing like him. Philip's voice cracked with fury. What you're asking is humiliating. I can't disguise myself as a girl, and even if I could, don't you think that might damage a teenage guy psychologically? Isn't that concerning to you? Marie met his anger with clinical calm. If you're truly confident in your masculinity, Philip, I'm certain you'll survive unscathed. Philip glared at her, recognizing the manipulation instantly. She knew exactly which nerves to strike, which insecurities to exploit. I am confident, he shot back. Completely secure, actually. But that's irrelevant. There's no logical reason to humiliate myself this way. You don't genuinely need me. You're exaggerating. Am I? Marie's expression hardened. We cannot afford to hire a replacement. We cannot transport one of our touring dancers back across 3 states in time. I need you, Philip. This production requires the exact number of dancers. The core formation collapses without symmetry, you've seen it yourself. I've pointed out flawed productions to you dozens of times. Philip felt the walls closing in. Or have you conveniently forgotten everything I taught you about symmetry? Philip remembered perfectly every lecture, every critique of imperfect productions, but surrender still felt impossible. I remember. But it's not critical. The show won't collapse because of one missing dancer. He grasped for alternatives. Drop another girl from the formation. Make it even numbers that way. You're right about one thing, Marie said quietly. It might not sink the performance. But it will sink me. Philip frowned. What are you talking about? I've held this position for exactly 1 year. Think about the optics. I split my company across state lines during opening week. I made that call. When the core looks unbalanced tonight, our patrons will notice. The board will notice. And they'll place the blame squarely where it belongs, on me. Her voice tightened. They already view me as inexperienced, Philip. After last winter's disaster, I'm essentially on probation. This was supposed to prove I deserve to be here. Philip winced at the memory. Last winter's opening night had been catastrophic, dancers visibly unprepared, timing off, the production ragged around the edges. The local arts journalists had eviscerated Marie in print. The board meeting afterward had been worse. She'd barely survived with her position intact. Since then, she'd been flawless. But Philip understood immediately, splitting the company would be viewed through the lens of that earlier failure. A pattern of poor judgment. Grounds for termination. His mother's salary was their only income. Without it, they'd lose the house within months. Suddenly, the humiliation of performing endpoint seemed considerably less catastrophic than homelessness. Economic desperation settled over him like a weight. Philip exhaled slowly. What exactly would I need to do? Relief flooded Marie's face. Core work exclusively. Deep background. Honestly, no one will pick you out individually, audiences never focus on back rows. The choreography is simple, especially for someone with your training. You'll relearn it in an hour, master it in 2. Philip closed his eyes, defeat washing through him. Fine. I'll do it. His voice barely rose above a whisper. For you. Marie embraced him fiercely, gratitude pouring out in whispered thanks. She released him and issued crisp instructions, eat something substantial. Then shower. Philip understood the unspoken addendum perfectly. The shower wasn't just about cleanliness. He'd need to shave legs, underarms, anywhere body hair might betray him under stage lighting. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last, and turned on the water. Steam filled the bathroom as Philip stepped under the spray. He retrieved his mother's floral-scented shaving cream, the irony wasn't lost on him, and propped his right foot against the tub's edge. The razor glided across his skin, leaving a smooth path through the lather. Was this insanity? Probably. But what alternative existed? Beyond obligation, Philip felt genuine debt to his mother. Their bond had strengthened in inverse proportion to his father's involvement. While his friends complained about overbearing mothers, Philip harbored genuine admiration for Marie. She'd raised 2 children alone, compensated for their father's failures, kept them fed and housed and functional. He owed her. The razor accumulated foam and severed hair. Philip grimaced, rinsed the blade under the stream, and continued methodically erasing every trace of hair from his leg. Satisfied with the smoothness, he switched to his left leg. At least it was winter. His school had eliminated gym classes for upperclassmen, budget cuts after voters rejected the school levy, which meant no locker room exposure. No one would glimpse his unnaturally hairless legs. A bitter smile crossed his face. His recent breakup suddenly seemed fortuitous. If his ex-girlfriend discovered he'd shaved his legs, she'd have left him instantly, assuming she hadn't already made that decision permanent. Philip still harbored hope for reconciliation, though he'd give her space. Time and regrown body hair would work in his favor. His chest required minimal attention, only sparse hair had developed there. His arms needed nothing, they'd always been smooth. Finally, he addressed his armpits, erasing the last visible markers of masculine development. As he eliminated evidence of his gender, Philip searched for silver linings. At least he'd spend the day surrounded by female dancers in form-fitting attire. That had been ballet's primary consolation when he was younger, proximity to girls. Talking with them, absorbing their presence. Today might offer a nostalgic echo of that experience. Except it wouldn't be the same. These dancers would be adults, not the teenage girls from his training years. And he'd be costumed identically to them, hardly a position of romantic advantage. Between the age gap and his disguise, any possibility of attraction was thoroughly extinguished. Still, missing a day of school counted as a minor victory. Philip completed his depilation, leaving only his pubic area untouched, and stepped from the shower. Towel wrapped around his waist, he examined his reflection, checking for facial hair with theatrical thoroughness. He chuckled at the performance. No beard had ever threatened to emerge on his face, another genetic advantage for today's charade. In his bedroom, Philip dressed in standard clothes, jeans and a t-shirt, temporary normalcy before the transformation ahead. After Marie confirmed she'd phoned the school attendance office with a fabricated illness, Philip followed her to the car. The drive to the theater passed in tense silence. When they arrived, Philip entered the building with dread coiling in his stomach. Intellectually, he understood he was helping his mother. Emotionally, that rationalization provided zero comfort. The costume designer, a woman Philip vaguely recognized from previous visits, approached Marie immediately, asking about the injured dancer's status. Marie gestured toward her son. Philip will be taking her place. The designer absorbed this information with barely a pause. Come with me, Philip. We need to fit you for the costume. Nausea rippled through him as he trailed her toward rows of hanging garments. She extracted a white tutu from the rack, examining it critically. We'll need minor alterations. The injured girl is close to your height, and your waist measurements appear similar. She produced a measuring tape. Let's confirm. Philip stood rigidly while she recorded his dimensions, comparing them against notes on a clipboard. A knowing smile appeared. Nearly identical sizing. Is that good? Philip managed. Excellent. Makes my job considerably faster. She paused. Go ahead and put on your tights so I can verify the fit properly. I don't have them with me. You don't? She blinked, then understanding dawned. Right, you stopped dancing. I'll need to pull a pair for you. Do you have a practice leotard? No, Philip admitted, heat crawling up his neck as the reality crystallized. The designer disappeared briefly, returning with tights and a leotard in his size. She pointed toward the dressing room. You can change in there. Privacy. Philip entered the expansive space and locked the door with a decisive click. He surveyed the room, empty now, but tonight it would swarm with dancers preparing for performance. He'd occupied rooms like this as a young dancer, back when people whispered about his potential, when he was someone worth watching. Today he'd be anonymous. Invisible. One indistinguishable figure among many, providing decorative background for the principals who actually mattered. Philip stripped off his jeans and boxers. The practice tights, pale pink, felt impossibly delicate as he drew them up his freshly shaved legs. He stared down at himself. His long t-shirt now resembled a cheap dress hanging over pink-encased legs. He looked absolutely ridiculous. Philip unlocked the door and emerged, moving quickly toward the costume designer. His appearance triggered visible reactions, heads turning, eyes lingering, from the scattered personnel in the room. By the time he reached her, his face burned crimson. The designer ignored his mortification entirely. "Put the costume on. Now?" "Why?" "So I can mark the alterations. It needs to be taken in slightly." "Taken in?" Philip's humiliation deepened. The injured dancer had marginally more mass than you do. Fantastic. Even female ballet dancers outweighed him. His attempts at building muscle suddenly felt even more pathetic. Philip yanked off his t-shirt. The designer inhaled sharply. "What?" Alarm spiked through him. "You have a bulge." Philip's eyes shot downward to his crotch. Mercifully, he wasn't aroused. He looked back up, bewildered. "I'm male." "What did you expect?" I know. "I'm sorry, I'll handle it." "Go ahead and put the costume on. We keep gaffs here somewhere for exactly this situation. Much more effective than a standard dance belt." "What's a gaff?" "It's used for cross-dressing roles. Conceals your anatomy completely." Philip flinched at her casual reference to his little guy. Somehow even the terminology felt emasculating. He stepped into the costume anyway, the layered tulle skirt rustling around him absurdly. The designer returned with the gaff, marked the costume for adjustments, then sent Philip back to the dressing room with his full ensemble, leotard, wrap skirt, point shoes, and the gaff. Alone again, Philip stripped off the tights and followed the designer's instructions for wearing the gaff. Tights back on, he examined his reflection. His front was completely smooth, disturbingly, mockingly smooth. A bitter laugh escaped him. If the kids he'd spent a year convincing of his heterosexuality could see him now, they'd think he deserved an Oscar. He pulled on the black short-sleeved leotard. 2 years had passed since he'd last worn one, yet the sensation was eerily familiar, like it had been waiting for him this entire time. The smile that crossed his face surprised him. This part, at least, felt right. He wished the rest could feel equally natural. The point shoes followed, fitting comfortably despite the gap in training. Philip completed the look with the black wrap skirt, additional insurance against any visible evidence of his biology. He emerged from the dressing room and found his mother, who immediately redirected him to the hairstylist, someone who'd arrived early as a personal favor to Marie. Philip sat while the stylist brushed his hair severely back from his face, securing it with what felt like dozens of pins. Then she attached a fake bun to the back of his head, anchoring it with what Philip estimated to be approximately 100 additional pins stabbing into his scalp. The stylist applied makeup next, subtle but sufficient to soften the angles of Philip's face, obscuring any masculine tells that might give him away to outsiders wandering through the building. Marie then escorted him to the rehearsal studio, already 10 minutes in progress. The dancers were still warming up when they entered. Marie clapped her hands sharply, commanding attention. "Everyone, this is Danielle's replacement. I expect you to treat this dancer with professionalism and respect." Several of the veteran company members studied Philip with narrowed eyes. Recognition flickered across their faces, they were piecing it together. Marie added quickly, "My son is doing all of us an enormous favor. I'm trusting you to keep his involvement confidential." Understanding dawned. The longer-tenured dancers exchanged knowing smirks. The wunderkind son of Marie Taglioni, the prodigy who'd abandoned ballet because he deemed it beneath him, had returned, costumed as a ballerina. One male dancer, Manuel, someone who'd endured years of Philip's second-hand disdain through company gossip, couldn't resist. He'd heard the stories, the talented boy who quit because ballet was for sissies. Now Manuel had his opportunity for payback. "Nice skirt," Manuel called out, his voice dripping with false admiration. "Very not sissyish." Laughter erupted, from several women, from all the men. Even Marie permitted herself a small smile. Philip's chin dropped to his chest, his gaze fixed on his exposed, hairless skin visible through the leotard's low neckline. "That's enough," Marie announced, her tone hardening. "Anyone who harasses my son will find themselves with the most miserable assignments I can devise. Are we clear?" "Yes, madam," the dancers chorused obediently. Marie exited to oversee set preparations, leaving Philip with the company and their rehearsal director, Alexander Nazarov, a severe man who'd defected from the Soviet Union in the early 80s. Philip had always found him terrifying. Nazarov directed Philip to the bar, positioning him between two female corps members. Philip joined their stretches, mimicking their movements. The dancer to his right, a pretty young woman with kind eyes, smiled at him during one exercise. "What you're doing for your mother is really sweet." Philip managed a genuine smile in return. "Thanks. I'd do anything for her." The girl laughed warmly. "I can definitely see that." Philip's face flushed again, though this time not entirely from embarrassment. The girl's expression softened with concern. "That came out wrong, I meant it as a compliment. Loyalty matters. Not many people have it anymore." Philip nodded. "I suppose that's true. Honestly, it's rare to see a guy treat his mother this well," she continued. "Most guys I know wouldn't go nearly this far to help their moms." "Thanks," Philip said, then realized he didn't know her name. "Sorry, what's your name?" As they executed a ply, she answered, "Carlotta Grisi." "I know you're Madame Taglioni and Roger Cerrito's son, but I never learned your first name." Philip glanced over his shoulder. "My mother doesn't talk about her kids much?" "She mentions you, actually, just never by name. The senior dancers treat it like it's forbidden or something. I've asked a couple times and hit a wall every time." Philip nodded slowly. "Mom took it hard when I quit ballet. I understand why they'd avoid bringing me up. I'm Philip." Philip and Carla, exchanged conversation throughout warm-ups, timing their words carefully between Mr. Nazarov's instructions. Philip learned she was 18, from New York, daughter of two Milanese-born dancers who'd performed in companies with his father after Roger left New York City Ballet. They discussed Marie, their respective training backgrounds, how long each had been dancing. When warm-ups concluded, rehearsal proper began. Just beforehand, the principal dancer, Lucille Gran, approached Philip. He'd recognized her immediately upon entering the studio. At 23, she was cast as Odette/Odile. Years ago, when Philip was still dancing, Lucille had been in the corps, openly admiring his prodigious talent. Now she was a principal. And he was a replacement corps member dressed as a woman. Lucille smiled down at him. "Quite the role reversal since we last met, wouldn't you say?" Philip nodded curtly, hoping to end the interaction. He'd found her insufferably arrogant even when she was merely corps, her ego unjustified by her middling abilities. Lucille smirked and turned to leave, but paused. "Try not to embarrass us out there." Philip shook his head at the unnecessary condescension. He'd always considered her absurdly pretentious for someone at a second-tier regional company. His city's ballet was provincial at best, exactly why Emma had bypassed it when a prestigious company showed interest. Philip met the remaining corps dancers, women who'd formed the uniform backdrop behind Lucille and the other principals. They greeted him warmly. Several echoed Carlotta's sentiment about his selflessness. One young ballerina even murmured that he was cute. Philip thought to himself, this isn't so terrible after all. Marie returned then to refresh his memory of the choreography. Philip rehearsed alongside Carlotta and another volunteer dancer. Everything flooded back effortlessly, every step precise, every transition clean. He felt invincible, as though no time had passed at all. "I'm a natural at this," he thought smugly. Philip launched into a leap. His landing went catastrophically wrong. He crashed onto his rear end in full view of the entire cast. Laughter erupted. Philip scrambled to his feet, rubbing his bruised backside. Lucille's voice cut through the noise, dripping with amusement. "I think we've found her stage name, Fanny." The room exploded with laughter. Dancers immediately adopted it, calling out Fanny with delighted cruelty. Philip's earlier contentment evaporated. Marie, visibly overwhelmed with other production crises, didn't intervene. She hurried out of the studio without addressing the mockery. Philip returned to practicing with Carlotta and the other volunteer, this time abandoning all arrogance. He checked his footing meticulously before every movement, determined to avoid further humiliation. When Mr. Nazarov assembled the full corps, Philip maintained his cautious precision and executed flawlessly. His proficiency stunned the younger dancers who'd never witnessed Philip Cerrito in his prime. To them, he'd been only a legend whispered about by senior company members, discussed with mingled disdain, envy, and admiration, though never by name in Marie's presence. During the lunch break, Carlotta approached him. "Why did you quit? I've never seen anyone outside the elite companies dance like that. You're the best partner I've ever had." "I have my reasons," Philip said evasively. What reasons could possibly justify walking away from that level of talent? "You need to perform again professionally. You're wasting yourself. It's just not in me anymore." Carlotta studied him skeptically. "Why exactly did you quit?" Philip exhaled sharply, then told her everything: the relentless bullying, the accusations about his sexuality, his desperate campaign to prove his heterosexuality, his ultimate decision to abandon ballet entirely. Carlotta shook her head, disappointment evident. "You're incredibly foolish for surrendering something you're this exceptional at just because other people are cruel and ignorant." Philip shrugged and returned to his meal in silence. After the afternoon rehearsal concluded, Carlotta helped Philip prepare for the evening performance. While the dancers typically handled their own makeup, the in-house stylist managed everyone's hair. As the other women had their hair secured in buns, Carlotta worked on Philip's face. Her touch felt intimate, one hand gently cupping his cheek for stability while the other applied pale pink lipstick with careful precision. Arousal stirred in Philip, and he silently thanked whatever impulse had made him wear the gaff. She moved to his eyes next, applying liner and shadow. Philip couldn't stop himself from maintaining eye contact, studying her face as she concentrated on his. When she finished, Philip turned toward the mirror. His reflection shocked him. His face, painted identically to Carlotta's, looked utterly feminine. The realization deflated him completely. She saw him as one of the girls. Despite knowing his biological reality, she related to him as a fellow ballerina. Any romantic possibility was already dead. He'd been permanently relegated to the friend category. The stylist summoned him next, affixing the white feathered headpiece that matched the other Swan Corps members. Back in the dressing room, Philip stripped off his pink practice tights and pulled on white performance tights. He donned the costume, a plain white camisole bodice with a short white tulle tutu. Point shoes completed the ensemble. He settled beside Carlotta, waiting as nervous energy filled the room. As curtain time approached, Lucille swept past in full costume, an elaborately detailed white gown crowned with a tiara, dramatically outshining the simple uniforms of the corps. She smirked at Philip as she glided by, performing mock regality. Philip suppressed the urge to say something cutting. For his mother's sake, he'd maintain perfect professionalism. The orchestra began. The overture's familiar strains filled the theater. The curtain rose. Lucille stood in the wings, visibly impatient for her entrance cue. When Philip's moment arrived, he stepped onto the stage and felt unexpected peace. Surrounded by 15 other identical swans, he was invisible, anonymous, protected by uniformity. No one could single him out. It felt strangely liberating. Philip mirrored Carlotta and the other swans perfectly throughout the first act, matching their port de bras, their positions, their synchronized movements. When they exited for intermission, he and Carlotta exchanged compliments on each other's technique, waiting in the wings for their next entrance. In that moment, Philip forgot every reason he'd abandoned ballet. He embraced it completely, allowing himself to feel the joy he'd suppressed for 2 years. Though even as he surrendered to it, he knew tomorrow he'd bury it again. Act 4 began. The curtain rose, stage lights blazing. Philip lay in his opening position, eyes downcast, then lifted his gaze toward the darkened audience, and froze. Front row. Unmistakable even in shadow. His ex-girlfriend. Seated between her parents. Philip nearly missed his first cue, his body momentarily paralyzed. The girl he'd been desperately trying to win back for weeks was watching him dance and point in a tutu, executing movements coded entirely as feminine. Panic flooded him. But her expression remained blank, she wasn't focused on him specifically, just watching the stage generally. Relief washed over him. He'd successfully disappeared into the core. She hadn't identified him. Philip's confidence returned, and he danced the remainder of the act with renewed assurance, one indistinguishable swan among many. As the finale approached, unexpected melancholy settled over him. He felt genuine sadness that the performance was ending. This would almost certainly be his last time on stage, and to his surprise, that realization troubled him deeply. The curtain descended. Curtain calls followed shortly. Philip watched Lucille accept a bouquet of roses during her solo bow, basking in applause. Backstage, Philip and Carlotta chatted while removing their costumes and makeup. Philip changed back into his street clothes, jeans and t-shirt, and felt oddly disoriented. After hours in feminine attire, masculine clothing felt foreign. He told himself the sensation would fade. To distract himself from the unsettling comfort he'd felt in the costume, Philip focused on Carlotta. She pressed him relentlessly about returning to ballet professionally. "I'm not interested," Philip said firmly. The statement produced shocked expressions from the surrounding dancers, the same disbelief they'd shown when he'd originally quit. Despite Carlotta's insistence that he was squandering extraordinary talent, Philip remained resolute. Avoiding the label of sissy required sacrificing his gift. He couldn't risk his classmates discovering he'd performed tonight. The social cost was simply too high. After the theater emptied, Marie took Philip to a nearby diner. His first bite came at 9:30 p.m., a familiar rhythm from his performing days. The memory surfaced with a smile, though Philip felt content leaving it buried in the past. They drove home afterward, and Philip collapsed into bed immediately. The next morning, he descended the stairs to find Marie absorbed in the newspaper, reading the performance review. "What does it say?" Philip asked. "Excellent review. Clive loved it." "That's great, Mom." Philip retrieved a cereal bowl from the cabinet. Marie leaned back in her chair. "Was it as terrible as you anticipated?" Philip shook his head. "Actually, no. It was pretty good. I can't believe we pulled it off." "I know, sweetheart. Thank you. I desperately needed your help, and you delivered." "You're welcome. Happy to help." Marie decided to venture further. "Philip, have you reconsidered returning to ballet? You possess genuine talent." Philip's response was immediate. "Absolutely not. I'm not going back to being Philip the ballet boy at school. That chapter is closed. I've worked too hard proving my masculinity to let a bunch of idiots turn me into an outcast again because they think all male dancers are gay." Marie nodded slowly. "I understand. It's your life, you decide how to live it." Philip smiled, relieved she'd dropped the subject. He poured cereal and carried the bowl to the table, his attention drifting to the newspaper review. He began reading. The critic praised the corps de ballet lavishly, flawless and effortless. Philip mentally repeated the words. The corps had received stronger praise than Lucille. Her Odette was criticized as wooden, though her Odile earned compliments. That'll humble her, Philip thought with satisfaction. All things considered, last night wasn't bad. Then his ex-girlfriend surfaced in his thoughts. Now he knew she attended ballet performances. That opened a new avenue for reconnection. Everyone at school knew about his dance background, but they didn't know he possessed deep knowledge of the art form. If her attendance reflected genuine interest rather than parental obligation, he could leverage that shared passion. Philip smiled at the strategy, then returned to reading. The review concluded with praise for Marie's direction. His eyes shifted to the accompanying photograph, Lucille in her white gown, supported in Manuel's arms. The corps filled the background, a large, full-color image with startling clarity. Their faces were perfectly visible. Philip's heart stuttered. He spotted Carlotta's face first. Then his gaze locked onto his own. The photographer had captured him looking directly toward the camera. His slender face, his distinctive high cheekbones, unmistakably recognizable. The spoon clattered from his hand. Philip fainted.